Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Roy, and I'm the college's Chief Diversity Officer. Welcome to What's Next after the 2020 election. A lot has happened in the 177 days since the 2020 presidential election. To start, we witnessed the first woman and person of color sworn in as the Vice President of the United States, and the first two women to lead the Senate and the House during a presidential address to Congress, a drop in the unemployment rate, and a new record high in the stock market, COVID-19 vaccinations and stimulus checks, a guilty verdict on all charges in a police misconduct case, and the DOJ's initiation of pattern and practice investigations into two police departments involved in the deaths of unarmed Black citizens. But we've also witnessed an insurrection and a second impeachment, attempts to quell voter turnout and peaceful protest, anti-Asian violence and mass shootings, and the perpetuation of the big lie by the former president and his allies that the new president stole the election by virtue of widespread voter fraud, despite a lack of evidence of that fraud and at least 63 failed lawsuits, just to name a few. Today, on the 100th day of the Biden-Harris administration, we will hear from a group of Rockland Community College faculty members who will address the historical, political, economic, legal, and sociological impacts of the 2020 presidential election and answer the question of what's next. Like our discussion about the challenges of democracy during the fall, I expect today's panel discussion to be edifying. Before we continue, I will remind you to please remain muted until asked to speak. Feel free to ask questions using the chat function, but there will also be an opportunity to ask questions later in the program. We are recording today's program and we'll post it on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion website. Now I will turn the program over to Professor Dino Ritsatos, Instructor of History and Program Director for the Departments of History and Foreign Language, who is serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Dino?
Hi, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. Okay, my name is Dino Ritsatos. I am the Program Director in the School of Humanities overseeing history, philosophy, and foreign language. This event here today is a continuation of an event that we had back in October, just prior to the election, in which we focused a lot on what our thoughts were and what our expectations were about what the turnout as well as the outcome of the election would be. I don't think any one of us could have imagined how things would have turned out since that day. But here we are, okay? 6 months later, and the world around us has changed in many, many ways. Some good, some not. With us today, we have a panel of experts who come from a diverse academic background, and all of them are going to share with us their insights into the events that have transpired since the election day. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists, okay? Our first is Dr. George Repic. Dr. Repic is the Dean of the School of Business and Professional Studies.
Thank you, Dino. Yes, I'm George Repic, Dean of School of Business and Professional Studies. I'm also a professor of business, economics, and political science at the college.
Thank you, George, and welcome. Professor Dino Lucido.
Hi. I'm Professor Dino Lucido. I teach history, political science, multicultural studies, and I've been at RCC about 12 years now, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you for joining us, Dino.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Professor Patricia Zaboynia.
Hi, thank you for having me, Dino. So I'm Program Director of the Legal Studies Department, and I also teach in legal studies, paralegal, criminal justice, and business and multicultural studies.
All right, well, thank you all for joining us. As this event unfolds, we have a variety of different questions for you to share with us using your background and expertise. Of course, we're also going to take questions from the audience at the end. We're going to start this with a 2 poll questions. So we'd like to get some input from the audience here. You can see the questions on your screen. Please fill them out as soon as you can, if you'd like to. And here are the results. How informed are you about the political climate in the US today? All right. 45% very informed, 5% not informed at all, and 50% somewhat informed. Do you have confidence in the election process in the US? A majority says yes, a whopping 85%. Do any of the panelists have any comments to those results before we officially get started? I'm curious.
Well, they're both comforting. Especially the second one is comforting, that there is confidence in the system, because we definitely need that in a democracy.
Absolutely. Now more than ever. Anybody like to share their insights on those results? Anything beyond what Professor Dino Lucido said?
Well, I will agree the second part, especially the confidence there. It's an election process is very important and important for the democracy and the future of the country. And the first part is about, it's about the population also. Some follow politics closely and some have some information. And so it's kind of reflects how the population feels.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the comment that I would have then that more people should get involved and be informed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always important to get involved. And that means getting involved in, starting at the local level. Always important to know what's going on around you in your immediate vicinity. I always encourage my students, and I know all of us here do as well, to get involved, to call, to, communicate with your local representatives, and to keep trying, because sometimes they're overwhelmed as well. And, just because they don't pick up the phone and you leave a voicemail and they don't get back to you, I always have students tell me that, they say, instructors always say, to call and to advocate, but no one picks up the phone, or some intern picks up the phone who doesn't know how to answer. Well, shouldn't stop you from trying. So you have to be very adamant about that, and you have to be persistent. So again, that's something I'd like to stress. All right, so I guess we could get started with the questions for today. We're gonna do, I'm gonna ask a question, and we're gonna get the responses from our panelists in alphabetical order. So Dino Lucido, you are up first. Okay. And from there, we'll go to George and George Repic, and then Patricia Szobonya. So the first question is, in your view, was the 2020 election a unique event in American history?
In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. In terms of the sheer number of votes, definitely 159 million votes, clearly the most ever in an election. Both candidates, even the losing candidate, received more votes than any president in our history. So the number of votes, the turnout was very high, 66%. And I would probably say that's the highest turnout in history, because though we've had higher turnouts, we've had a of 1876 with Rutherford B. Hayes barely beating Samuel Tilden. But in those elections, that was before women could vote. That was before most African Americans could vote. The voting age was 21. So you'd probably have to put an asterisk next to those turnout numbers and say that this turnout was clearly unique.
Thank you. One follow-up question. Election reform. You hear that word a lot, okay? But everyone's answer isn't always the same. First, do you believe, Professor Dino Lucido, do you believe that election reform is needed today? And if so, in what form?
Election reform in terms of you had many states, particularly battleground states, they amended the rules to the elections prior to it, mainly through the courts and through secretaries of state, not in keeping with the Constitution. And in Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1, it says that the state legislatures clearly make the rules on how elections are conducted. But on the other hand, unfortunately, most of those state legislatures took the year off, giving the governors emergency powers during COVID. So what you're seeing in some states is legislatures trying to get control back of the electoral process. And there's some resistance to that. We saw that in Georgia, resulting in the Major League Baseball removing the All-Star game there. But I think some reform is definitely necessary.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. And now we're going to turn it to Dr. George Repic. All right. Dr. Repic, do you think the 2020 election was unique in American history? Does this election stand out? And if so, in what way?
Well, every election in its way, it's very unique. But what is unique about this election, it's in the backdrop of the pandemic that pretty much shut down the entire US economy, one of the largest economy in the world. And that pandemic, so many shortcomings that we have. We didn't even have masks for our population to protect it. We ran out of hospital beds. We ran out of the antibiotics. So it showed the shortcomings in the planning that we really did not have it as a country. And so hopefully this is, and obviously this always will favor opposition party that is not in a power when this is not adequately addressed. And this, hopefully going forward, this issue will be addressed. But yes, definitely in the backdrop of that pandemic and all the shortcomings that we saw that we had when it comes to medical supplies, it's very unique.
Yeah. What about election reform? Do you think it's time for election reform to occur? And if so, in what way?
Well, election in the United States, unlike some other countries where you have on a federal level, the laws set how elections will be held. The United States, because of the system that we have in the states, it really falls under the state rules and local election boards to design that one. So the question is, do we go and say, let's have a federal type of regulations when it comes to voting, or we work on a local level and adjust it as appropriately needed there.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Repic. Professor Zaboynia, do you think the 2020 presidential election was a unique event in American history? And if so, how?
I'd have to say yes and no as well. One is it's unique because we had election day during the course of the pandemic. So right there changes the process in and of itself, because this was the first time where we didn't just have one specific day also to vote. You were able to go in to do early voting. It was also the largest amount of people who did mail-in votes. Also, I guess at the time, the current president was already saying that there, alleging that there possibly would be fraud in the voting process. So that was already starting the momentum of stop the steal. And immediately after the votes were counted, there was no concession. Not that that hasn't been done, but it hasn't been done, at least in my recollection. I think if you look historically, at some point in modern history, there hasn't been a president who hasn't conceded, given that concession speech, and nor attend the inauguration. And I think that sends a message then, where as people in the country, we're seeking to look to that peaceful transition of power. So I think that that is definitely unique, that all of those things came into play in a time of a pandemic and all of the other social issues that were going on.
All right, thank you, thank you. Yeah, I do want to, stress that, a peaceful transition of power. That's one of the things, America stands out to the world for. In many countries, an election can lead into a civil war, and it's actually a very common occurrence in many, many countries throughout the world. You have an election and the results, no one's going to be happy, and it's almost a guarantee there's going to be a war. And in many cases, that leads to a coup and a dictatorship and a military takeover. So that's one of the things that distinguishes the U.S. and other countries like Britain and France and Germany, in modern times from the rest of the world, is we have peaceful transitions of power. Okay, we can't say that about many other places, unfortunately, but this definitely was shaking those branches of that hold our foundation together. So very good points. All right, so the next question. And we're going back to Dino Lucido. Start the order again. Did the outcome of this election and what followed in its aftermath surprise you? And if so, in what way?
Didn't surprise me based on the polling. I mean, in 2016, the polling was wrong. However, the polling showed Biden a lot more ahead than Hillary Clinton was just prior to 2016. But also, and this is something that George said, when you have a crisis, particularly a long-running crisis, you're going to see the incumbent is going to get blamed for it, particularly if they are perceived as not taking it seriously. This was the case with Herbert Hoover with the Great Depression. He was perceived as not taking it seriously, not doing enough to address the crisis, and he was thrown out of office. And Franklin Roosevelt was elected. So, based on that, not surprising. It was surprising if you want to look at the actual election that Trump won Ohio and Florida, and we haven't had a candidate since 1960, since the Kennedy-Nixon election, where a candidate who won Ohio and Florida did not win the election. If you want to look at those 19 bellwether counties that normally determine or indicate who wins, Trump won 18 of the 19. But a lot of that shows you the changing of the demographics in the country. It shows you the changing of voter trends, people from blue states moving to red states and vice versa. So it was not unexpected or surprising.
Okay. Thank you.
The election.
Dr. George Repic, were you surprised with the outcome of the 2020 election? And if so, in what way?
Well, I was not surprised with the results of the election. What I was surprised with the how close election was, given the backdrop of hundreds of thousands, and by the time elections were, we had almost close to 400,000 dead in the country, and all the media and pointing out all the issues and civil unrest, and in the backdrop of police brutality and shootings. So for me, the surprise was that it wasn't much wider margin.
Okay. And Professor Zaboynia, did the election results, the 2020 election results, presidential election results, did they surprise you?
Interestingly enough, I was not surprised by the closeness of the margin. So it's kind of interesting to have a different viewpoint from Dr. Repic. I wasn't shocked about the outcome, and I wasn't shocked that it would be relatively close, because there are a lot of supporters out there for Trump. And if you look at the current climate, then you can see that there was a large amount of the population seeking change, seeking something different. If you looked at the Trump presidency, really just looking at the COVID crisis, it was mishandled. I think that to touch on what Professor Lucido said about the some people changing the states from blue to red and so forth, I think that really was a direct response to the handling of COVID. And I think that that's really where the shift came. the margin was close because Trump supporters were there, but I think some of those people, those supporters actually shifted and went to Joe Biden just because of the lack of transparency and lack of trust over it. And then what came with COVID also was the economic crisis. So, at one point we had a booming economy and now we don't. We know it's a result of the COVID crisis, not necessarily of presidential handling, but it happened to come under that at the same time. So I think people were really seeking change.
Yeah, it's a very good point about the impact of COVID on the election results. A quick question for all three panelists. Do you think if COVID never occurred, Trump would have won? Show of hands, who thinks Trump would have been the president had there not been a COVID pandemic?
Well,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. All right, so I'm gonna start the next question and we're gonna go back to Professor Lucido. America today is more divided than any other time in the last 50 years. Why do you think this is the case? And what is its solution? What has to be done to bring this country to make it more united again?
Well, I'm old enough to remember the 60s and the 70s when the country was very, very divided. And I remember all the unrest of the 1960s. From a political standpoint, I remember the 1968 Democratic Convention and all the rioting that went on there, and the Chicago 7 and the Days of Rage. A lot of people forget in the 60s and 70s, we had the Black Liberation Army, we had the FALN, Puerto Rican Independence Army, we had the Symbionese Liberation Army, the Weather Underground. The country looked like it was coming apart in the late 60s and early 70s, but it didn't. And that's why I'm sort of hopeful and sort of thinking along the lines of this too shall pass, and the country will come back together.
All right. All right. Dr. Repic, same question. America today is more divided than any other time in the past 50 years. Why do you think that's the case, and what needs to be done to bring this country together again?
Well, I do think I agree with Professor Lucido that there was a lot of divisions in our country. If you look at it, pretty much every decade from 1800s to present time, there were some riots and civil unrest and civil rights movement in 60s. So if you look at it in the past, there was the same talk as it is today. We are divided as never before. We can't get together, can't get along. But America always finds its way. The deep structures and democratic structures that are built in, and the people that are, they can see it, what it means to lose the freedom. They can see it, what it means to not have a democracy, and the people voices prevail. And so I do think that from what we've seen last year in the backdrop of pandemic and civil unrest and protests and everything else, that is actually in some ways good for the country to say, okay, what should be our priorities? Where have we gone off the track, and what do we need to do to get back on track and be more stronger and more united? And I think that is going to happen.
All right, thank you. And Professor Szobonya, America today is more divided than ever before, at least in the last 50 years. Why do you think that's the case, and what could be done to bring this country together again?
Okay, so I'd have to agree with my colleagues that the country has always been pretty much divided. I think it may appear that way because of social media, or if you go on the news, you can look at CNN and see the same exact story and go to Fox and it's completely interpreted or stated in a different way from someone else's viewpoint. But that's always been happening. If you went back in history too of the political propaganda, there's always been different sides.
Mhm.
Now the question is, why is America divided. And I would say, you know, all of the events that my colleagues have already stated, there's always been inequality. So, you know, for some marginalized groups, I mean, if you're talking about the civil rights movement, the LGBT fight for rights, immigration issues, and it's typically stemming from groups not having the same rights as everyone across the board. So in answer then to the second part of that question would be what could we do to unite? Well, I think really at the heart of everyone's movements are for equality. That's not really an easy fix when you look at this country, because you would really have to start with, I think, all of the institutions in the country, from education, from healthcare, from the criminal justice system, all of them. It's a inundating task, because which one do you start with? I mean, we are doing some police reform in New York, not throughout the country though. That's a piece of the problem, but it's not the answer to all of the problems. You would need to really fix all of the systems. That's just one facet of it. So, and not only with reforming an institution in and of itself, you have to reform the culture. You have to reform the mindset of people that are in those institutions, so that they're implementing the things in the manner that we're seeking, so that the result is actual equity.
All right, thank you, thank you. Yeah, and you know, from a historical perspective, there have been many moments in our history that we have been, you know, divided. Speaking as a historian myself, you know, I look back to the election of 1800, right when we were getting started. The country nearly tore itself apart between the Adams and Jefferson election. We were divided in the 1820s between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. You know, that's actually how the modern day Democratic Party emerged from that kind of divide at that time. We were divided again in the 1850s. So the country, this isn't unprecedented in the sense of, you know, the polarization, the division, but I would say in modern times, last say 30 or 40 years, we've always been divided, but I think the extent of the division has been, the gap has grown. So, but yeah. Yes. So, Professor Lucido, we're gonna start with you, and thank you, Professor Szobonya. Thank you. I'm sure we all know what happened on January 6th at the Capitol Hill. You know, you saw hundreds, well, thousands of Trump supporters, tens of thousands of Trump supporters protested that day, and hundreds of them ended up protesting in front of Capitol Hill and end up going inside. You know, that's an unprecedented moment, I would say, in our country's history. So what does that mean? Okay, and this is for Professor Lucido. What does that event mean for the issues that our country faces? The polarization, the division. Is that a sign of that kind of division, that frustration, or was this more of a spontaneous event? Was this something that just happened as a result of the events of that day? Or was it a buildup of something that has been brewing for some time?
Well, I think it's an indication that there's a lot of anger out there, and like you said, it was a few hundred Trump supporters. It's not all Trump supporters were there or in favor of it. It wasn't surprising based on some of the president's pre and post-election rhetoric with regard to the election was going to be rigged and then was rigged. And I kind of look at it this way with regard to the anger. Anytime the rules of a game are changed prior to or very close to when the game is starting, okay, whoever wins will be fine with that, but whoever loses is going to be angry. And this is what happened with Trump supporters. And things got out of control at the Capitol. It was very unfortunate. It was tragic, and it was very, very embarrassing for the country in the eyes of the world. And I think it discredited us, particularly in front of some of our major competitors and challengers like China and Russia and Iran. So Well, now I don't think it will be happening again based on the security that they have there, which probably should have been in place that day anyway, based on the temperament of the country at that time.
All right. Thank you, Professor Lucido. Dr. Repic, same question. The insurrection in Capitol Hill on January 6th, again, major tragic and unprecedented event. Do you think that, this sheds light on bigger issues that are affecting the country? Do you think that this was something spontaneous, a spur of the moment thing triggered by, heated rhetoric and unhappiness as a result of the 2020 election? Or was this something bigger? Okay. Was this something that had been brewing for some time and just erupted?
I mean, when we think about insurrection, we are really thinking quite organized groups of people, usually with weapons, and some have some support by the military that want to overthrow the government. And so, I mean, using the word insurrection in this instance might be a little bit too strong. I think it was more spontaneous and obviously egged by certain rhetoric. But insurrection, you have to have a lot more organization. And I will think there was a total lack of security and a response by the Capitol Police. I don't think they have responded appropriately. I don't think our security forces properly estimated the risk based on the rhetoric that was going on for months. You could have expected it that there will be some movement to try to attack buildings, if nothing else, and they failed. So I really think it's the securities that failed there, and I wouldn't say it was insurrection, because I don't think there was, based on the news reports and everything else, there was not weapons, there was not people, nobody was really killed other than one lady there, and the rest was accidental or health reasons that people died. So I think it's a little bit too strong of a word to use it if you think in a sense what insurrection is. But certainly there is a sign of unhappiness in a losing camp. This is, I mean, earlier you pointed out in a lot of countries, when you have such a heated political debate and polarization, you will expect this type of action by the certain individuals, and that's why you have to have a police to stop that.
Yeah. Thank you. And Professor Zaboynia, same question. The events of January 6th on Capitol Hill, is that something that was part of a bigger issue that has been brewing, or was this something spontaneous? Was it the last minute or something planned in those brief days prior to? Or was this something that goes back way before that?
I would have to say that it goes back way before. If you look at, I mean, the signs were there. If you look at, I think just on the news this morning, there was a new indictment for the, I forget the group that planned the attempted kidnapping of Governor Whitman. And they were just indicted, I think, this morning for weapons of mass destruction. Now, I'm not saying they were there at the insurrection. This was just a sign of, the groups that were out there and the capability. Do I think that people just went out to protest peacefully that day, and then all of a sudden, just because of a statement from Trump to walk down to Capitol Hill and go bombard it? I think that some people probably just went out and thought they were peaceful protesting and maybe got caught up in the moment, but there were definitely groups there that knew what they were doing. Again, this is, I guess, the news channel that you picked to watch. If you looked at CNN, you would have saw that people had maps of the layout. They knew where to go when they were inside. There were coordination. I'm not sure about, what weapons they had, but there was definitely some coordination and planning. You don't just go to peaceful protests down the block and then have a map of the area and, have coordinating people to go this way and that way and a plan.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. So it sounds like it was a combination of things, that there were elements that were just caught up in the moment, elements that had this whole thing orchestrated, and other elements that were just brewing with anger, and of course, the heated rhetoric that came from the president and others, I think, just spilled over, and it was just kind of like a snowball effect. So does it sound like we had a combination of different things going on simultaneously, or a fire that was just fueled and enhanced and then spilled over into what that was? I do think all of us can agree that there was a failure of security that day. The Capitol, the US Capitol, and all federal buildings should be heavily guarded. But on the day in which the election results were being certified, it should have been even more guarded. There should have been a greater level of security. No one should have been allowed anywhere near there. So I think that does shed light into flaws in terms of security measures, especially for the federal government and other such agencies.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. If you recall, in the summer, with the protests at the Capitol, the National Guard was called in, and President Trump did use the Guard to escort him to walk down to a church and take a picture with a Bible. So where was the lapse in protection or calling in the National Guard at the right time also, because, when it was going on and everybody knew about it.
Exactly. All right. So the next question, what impact, we kind of already touched this about COVID-19 and its impact, but another kind of affiliated question is the everything today, where most major issues become politicized. Okay. I mean, you can't think of in the last, say, 10 years of a big issue in this country that hasn't been politicized. Was that always the case? Maybe not to this extent, but here we are. Do you think the pandemic has been one such issue where it's been politicized, and in what ways? Okay, Professor Lucido?
Well, Winston,
and I just want to add, what effects, if you believe it has, what effects has that, politicizing process of the event, what effect has it had on COVID-19 itself, on the overall pandemic and the way it was approached and the way it was handled and so on?
with regard to whether COVID was politicized, I'll just quote Winston Churchill, who said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." Now, that quote is often attributed to Rahm Emanuel, who was President Obama's chief of staff, but he pilfered and plagiarized it. That was Winston Churchill. And it was politicized on both sides, clearly. It was politicized with regard to, and I keep coming back to this point because the elections clause of the Constitution says that changes to the election, the manner in which elections will be conducted in the states, is in the purview of the legislature. And the changes that were made based on COVID were done by courts, were done by secretaries of state, were not done by the legislature. So you could say that the Democratic Party took advantage of COVID to give them an advantage with regard to mail-in voting. And if we look at the final statistics, we see that almost half the country voted by mail. In fact, only about a quarter of the country, 27%, actually showed up traditionally the way voters show up on the day of the election. And then the mail-in voting, we saw almost a 2-to-1 Democratic advantage in the results. So clearly it was politicized. Also on the other side, it was politicized. President Trump tried to, in holding those conferences, using Dr. Fauci, using Dr. Birx, which ultimately backfired on him. But yeah, that's common. You're going to see the political parties try to politicize a crisis, and that clearly happened.
All right, thank you. Dr. Repic, same question. Do you think the, we see major events in America unfolding over the last several years, and, everything becomes, since we're so divided, things become so politicized. Do you think that was the case with COVID? And as a reason, if you do, what were the effects of that kind of process on, how it was handled, on, how there was, some level of coordination between federal and state level agencies? Do you think there was an impact as a result of things being politicized, whether for the worse or not?
Well, I mean, like anything in politics, if any time you have a chance to politicize something and you think it's going to favor you and your position, you're going to politicize. Certainly, there was a lot of politicizing, just like after 9/11, when government took the powers and took a lot of freedoms away from Americans that we had in regard to monitoring and everything else, because of the fact that saying of the terrorism, and a lot of those freedoms were taken away, and the Patriot Act. At the same time, here too, politicization of fear of and on both sides, it was politicized, and I mean, that's politics. That's the nature of politics. If you think you're going to have an advantage of it, and you're going to do it. A lot of times, politicians don't think about the consequences that they will have on a population or a country if they can, if it can help them to get elected. Why not politicize? That's just nature of politics.
Thank you. And Professor Zaboynia, same question. Do you think that the pandemic has been politicized, as have many issues before it? And if so, what kind of impact did that have on its handling?
Well, definitely, it's been politicized. If you just, again, look at the news channels. One side is saying that you don't need to wear masks, or masks don't really work, and you look at the other side and you double up on masks, or what mask, and so forth. The outcome is still happening right now. Now it's just on the vaccines. So if you look at, some people are against getting vaccinated. They're saying that they know more people who have been vaccinated who have died. And then you have probably more Democrats who are getting vaccinated. So what's the result? Some people are not going to get vaccinated based on their political beliefs. So it's being politicized. But at the end of the day, if you happen to get it and get very sick, that's going to be the outcome.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. The next question is going to focus on law enforcement in America. Okay. And of course, like everything, there is a political aspect to it. So I'm going to go back to Professor Lucido. And obviously, we've all been hearing in the news everything that's been going on regarding law enforcement, but I'm going to zoom in on the George Floyd tragedy. What does that say about law enforcement in America today? And what do you believe needs to be done to ensure that incidents like this don't happen again?
Well, it shows that there are some bad apples in the police force, as there are in every profession. There are some bad actors. It's hard to imagine how they get in onto the force and remain on the force, because I'll give you a personal story. My son wanted to be a police officer. He went to John Jay, got his degree, and they did a background check on him just to become an entry-level NYPD officer. You wouldn't believe. They went through his social media, sat there at a computer. He had to give all his passwords for 3 hours. And it's hard to imagine, but bad apples do get through. There needs to be reform. There needs to be retraining at some levels. There needs to be, I'm especially big on this, there needs to be a development of some type of non-lethal technology to subdue someone who is resisting or is a danger without shooting them in the chest. And clearly tasers aren't working, particularly if you have police officers who can't tell the difference between their taser and their pistol in the Dante Wright case. So hopefully something good will come out of this tragedy. The video, the optics of it, the length of the video. And in our history, we have seen reforms from that. One of the first incidents of this, I don't want to go on too long, was the televised images of the Children's Crusade in 1965 in Birmingham, Alabama. That's really what galvanized the civil rights movement and brought a lot of people, particularly white people in the North, to understand what was going on in the South when Bull Connor sick. There's police dogs, the fire hoses, the tear gas, the rubber bullets. People got to see that on TV and for the first time, and it's the optics that brings about change. And that, of course, led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. So this video, is tragic as it is, hopefully some good things will come from it in terms of reforms.
All right, thank you. Dr. Repic, same question. The George Floyd tragedy, what does that say about law enforcement in America today? And what needs to be done to ensure that incidents like that never happen again?
Well, I mean, it was just heartbreaking and harrowing watching it. Somebody sitting on another human being by their neck, and person saying that I can't breathe, and they don't move their knee from their neck. That should not happen. But again, that is one police officer, and maybe there's always other police officers that don't do the things right. But I will say police officers do a very dangerous job, and there is a lot more that needs to be done in regards to rules of engagement, in regards to training of police. Obviously, there is a lot of abuse of power that is happening by some police officers. And obviously, there are disproportionate impact of policing and in the society, and primarily impacts people that are really poor. I know in America, it has also racial connotation, but really what is more important is that the criminal justice system is reformed, that the rules of engagement are created. I go to a case of Anthony Hill down in Georgia. He was Air Force veteran, and he had a mental illness. He was bipolar, and somebody called on him. He's running naked in a building. Now, police officer came, intervened, and he was apparently running towards in the building, and he said, "Stop." Obviously, if somebody is naked and running in the building, and you can see he or she, he had no weapons, why firing those weapons? It just makes no sense. It defies common sense. And I don't know if it's a training, if it's a fear of it, it just doesn't make any sense. I look at it with harrowing that Rayshard Brooks in Atlanta by the Wendy's. The fellow fell asleep in the car, and events unfolded. I don't understand. The shooting a fellow what was running it, you already know where he's living. He's saying he wants to go visit his sister. She's there. You can catch that fellow later on. And so these situations, I think that rules of engagement with police officers, it shouldn't be, let me arrest him, or I fear for my safety. And sure, I mean, when I read the story of Rayshard Brooks, it really breaks my heart, because he gave an interview to a TV station that, he had a record before, and he was trying to do the right thing. And when he goes for a job and they ask him on the application, do you have a criminal record? And he has to respond with yes. And obviously that limits his job prospects. And even the previous conviction, it's very questionable. And they don't get, he did not get a good representation. And so I really do think criminal justice system has to be reformed. I think it's more important than the police reform. Yes, we need a police reform, but criminal justice system needs to be reformed. So to give a hope to individuals that if they make a mistake, it's not banned for life, that you can't be a member of a society and a successful and productive member of society. So there are always bad apples, but it's also how it is trained and what are the rules of engagement. So train the police better, make sure that perhaps that new technology, if you have to subdue the individual, But you can always arrest those individuals if you know who they are. You can find them. You don't have to shoot them.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Repic. And Professor Zaboynia, same question. The George Floyd tragedy and law enforcement. What does that say about the current state of law enforcement in America, and what needs to happen to ensure that tragedies such as that never occur again?
Well, I agree. It's not a representation of the entire police department or the police officers in our country, but it does show us very clearly on a videotape that this behavior did occur by a police officer. So we could say that there's a bad apple. I would agree with Dr. Repic that I'm sure there's more than one bad apple. It's also that we have a videotape, and the question is, if we didn't have a videotape, where would we be? The report said something otherwise, right? A medical, some medical issue was the cause of death, and that's how it was immediately reported. And there were 3 other police officers there, though. How did that get to that statement in a report? They were there. Everybody saw it. We know what the conviction is now. So I think that this case is showing that police officers will be held accountable. And what about the other 3 and their accountability and their participation in having the death of George Floyd being reported that way incorrectly initially? I would like to see police officers stand up to other officers who are abusing their power and using excessive force. Now, a colleague, Joe Conjura, had sent me a case, and it came up in the other panel last week, the carryall horn, I guess, bill. It was a case. So for this one particular person, police officer, she did step in a couple of years ago and was fired for stepping in for another officer that was using excessive force. She actually brought another action in the last year, subsequently after George Floyd's death, and the motion the court to reinstate this case, because it was decided years ago. And what she wanted was 2 years to be back on the force so that she could reach retirement, because what she did was step in for somebody that was using excessive force, and that's why she was fired. And she actually won that case, and she was reinstated for those 2 years. And this came out, it's a very recent decision. But that's just showing that, police officers have to police other police officers also. I know as attorneys myself, we have to govern ourselves and someone else. If I know that there's an attorney that's doing something wrong and I know about it, I am going to be in trouble with the Bar Association myself just for knowing and not reporting. So I think that that's something also, because those are the people that are out there doing the actions together and can see it happening, among other reforms, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, definitely. I know in the chat room, Patricia Maloney-Titlin is mentioning how, these are excellent points, and I agree, they are. It's also important to know how technology, its role has played in this, because if we did not have the technology to view these images, okay, as tragic as they are, we would not be having this discussion, at least not in this way, okay? It's the videos, it's the recordings. People today just pull out their phones and they record these incidents, and those go a long way because they do shed light. And I think officers' body cameras also shed light, and you've been seeing that more and more recently as to, what happened. So I think that's important. I want to just also add that, I think one of the essential needs that needs to occur in terms of law enforcement is community outreach. And, the police officers should be familiar with their surroundings, with their area, and with the people who live there. The people who live there should not be intimidated by them, and they should not be intimidated by the people who live there. there should be a comfort for both sides. I know police officers are always on guard, but at the same time, they should have a greater familiarity and with their environment, and there should be stronger community outreach. I think that's very helpful. And again, speaking as a historian, when immigrants first came here, I just want to add that, you know, many of them would come to, right when they got off Ellis Island, or right when they got to Ellis Island, they would see cops and they would be scared to death. And because they came from countries where the cops were the basically the spies or the secret police by the emperor or by the dictator or by the king or whoever, and they were sent to ensure that there was 100% loyalty. And if there was any kind of suspicion, the cops, their goal was to arrest you. So they were there to, you know, to pretty much, they were not a protective force. They were an entity that whose job was to carry out the orders of the central authority, and that was to basically root out spies and suspects and, you know, people who would pose some kind of danger. So I think, you know, when they came here, when immigrants came here, they were explained that these guys were here to help the community. So I think we have to also go back to that kind of community grassroots effort. Anybody want to add or comment regarding what I said?
I agree with you, and I was thinking about this. You notice more police presence at the end of the month, and this is you know, a lighter topic, but they're out patrolling traffic at the end. Is it just me, and anyone can chime in, but police officers are more visible at the end of the month. Why are they more visible at the end of the month? You would, if it is there for safety in traffic, you would expect to see the same amount of presence throughout the month. But at the end, and they don't call it a quota, but there is some productivity that has to be presented. But so now we're talking about productivity and not really the safety of the community. Right. You know, so in some way that, and that's just one of the, you know, issues, but it does speak to bigger ones.
Right. Yeah. I know, again, speaking as
You
a
know,
historian, go ahead, Professor Lucido, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What you were saying with regard to everyone has a video camera on their phone now, and that's a really good check. And what's amazing is this officer Szobonya knew he was being recorded. There were lots of people recording him, and he didn't care. Okay, normally officers would not want to be on camera that way, but if they are misbehaving, people could see it now. You have to go all the way back to 1992 with the Rodney King case. The LAPD was known for its brutality. They were notorious for it, particularly with regard to African Americans. And it was someone carrying one of those big giant VCR cameras who saw that they took Rodney King behind, out of sight, and then started pounding him with their nightsticks. And he was able to record it on one of those big camcorders. And that got the video out, and that led to reforms within the LAPD. And everyone having cameras now, they really, and the body cams, like you said, on the police officers. So that should definitely be helpful going forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, this brings us to our last question. All right, and Professor Lucido, we start with you. Your outlook on America's future. Where do you see this country 10 years from now? Politically, economically, socially? I'm leaving that up to you.
Well, I think politically, in terms of division and unity, it seems to be cyclical. So I think we're going to pass out of this division. But we're going to need some help from the politicians, as long as both parties are viewing politics as a blood sport, as a zero-sum game. We're going to stay divided. And unfortunately, and since this is about a presidential election, the past two presidential elections have ended in the same way, in that you had the loser of each election refusing to acknowledge, even though Hillary Clinton did give us a concession speech, the Democratic Party immediately came out and said that he's an illegitimate president, that this was Russia collusion, he had help from Russia. And now you have President Trump saying this was an illegitimate election. So what that means is you have half the country viewing the president as not legitimate, as someone who came into office through some type of malfeasance. And that's really never happened in our country. You'd probably have to go all the way back to 1824 and the corrupt bargain that elected John Quincy Adams when
Yeah.
Andrew Jackson refused to accept him as legitimate. And unfortunately, we're going to have 8 years of this, and it's not good. We need for once the candidate is elected, we need for the other party to accept it and move forward and unify the country. But like I said, using that old Persian adage, this too shall pass. And I think in a decade we will be more united, and hopefully the economy will bounce back from COVID. It appears to be bouncing back now, and I'm cautiously optimistic.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Repic, your outlook on America's future. Where do you see this country 10 years from now, politically, socially, economically? What's your take?
Well, I certainly do hope that there is some police reform, and disproportionately communities are being impacted in the United States. So that has to change, and crime rates have to go down. But the biggest issue, obviously, these are the issues that country will deal with it, with the police reform and criminal justice reforms. But the biggest issue really is the poverty, is the economy, poverty, chance to have opportunity to have a job. When you don't have a hope, when you lose that hope, it's very hard to get it. So we need to provide the opportunities for all the citizens to have that equal opportunity, chance to have a job, chance to earn their income, provide more opportunities for education. One of the greatest way to get out of poverty it's education. If you look at South Korea, we look at China. You look at China in 1950s, they had millions of people dying from starvation. Today, Chinese economy, GDP is almost on par with USA, and it's going to surpass us at GDP. So how USA is going to, it will depend how are we going to fight that enemy within, and that enemy, it's poverty, jobs, decreasing wages. Can we work to increase those wages, increase the middle class? That's the enemy within. Or are we resort to military interventions that we have done in the past? I mean, even today, our government is talking about Russia is our great enemy, China is our great enemy. And my fear is, if they are not able to improve the economic climate in the country, one of the always uniting forces is when we have a military interventions. And then country unites when we go and attack some other countries. And if you look at it during the Iraqi war and a bogus claim of the weapons of mass destruction, pretty much population, when you did the polls, it was about 70% of population were supporting it. And if you look at a vote in the Congress and Senate, it was very, very few abstentions there. I think it was 1 or 2. How our country is going to focus. Are we going to focus on developing our manufacturing sector, creating opportunities for people, changing a justice system so that people that's been in poverty, they have a chance to rise up and become productive members of society, provide education. I mean, when I look at the food insecurity and I look at the colleges around the country that they are providing a food for our students, it breaks my heart. One of the richest countries in the world, and we have young people and children starving. That should not happen. I remember in 1990s, I was studying and I was doing some research in New Jersey. At that time, in 1990s, 95, they were saying there were 400,000 children in the state of New Jersey that went to bed hungry. I mean, and we're still talking about it, the poverty and hunger and these issues. And the country needs to focus. We spend about $6 trillion, $7 trillion on the useless wars, 20 in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Libya, instead of using those resources and rebuild our country and rebuild our inner cities and provide opportunities and build the infrastructure. We pretty much in a lot of aspects have a third world infrastructure. I mean, all countries that we're developing countries are having a better internet, they're faster speeds, they're having faster trains, better airports. We have a literally crumbling infrastructure. Yeah. And we need to focus inside to rebuild the country. And when we build the country, and when the citizens have opportunities, we're going to be a shining star, and some other countries will look upon us. I think after the end of the Cold War, we started saying we are the superior to other countries, and because of that superiority, other countries should listen to us. And as a result, we squandered a lot of money and a lot of resources instead of rebuilding our own country here.
Very good points there. Thank you, Dr. Repic. And Professor Zaboynia, last question to you. Your outlook on America's future. Where do you see this country 10 years from now?
I'm positive about it, but let me just stem off from what Dr. Repic stated, just because he was talking financials. We spent billions of dollars on the political campaign too, so that's an issue just in and of itself. Do we really need to spend billions of dollars? I think for 2020 election it was 14 billion, and that just goes to show you that only the wealthiest people in America can really participate in that on that level. But moving forward, I'm positive that the divide or the gap will get smaller, just because of the generation coming up. Gen Z is coming up. They're just starting to head into college right now or into the workforce. And they're the most diversified and accepting population. So if you have this group of people getting into the workforce and being educated right now, and for the next 10 years coming up, voting power, and they have the power of social media to use it in a way that older generations just don't. They can unite, and I think that they're going to call out when they see something wrong. They care about social issues. They care about climate change. Look at Greta Thunberg, had 1 million people walk out of classes for climate inaction. Look at Malala Yousafzai. She won the Nobel Peace Prize. And if you even just Google young influencers of this generation, there are so many young people that are doing amazing things for all different sort of social issues. So I don't think that it's going to be exposed. So the country really has to move forward, or we're going to see more instances of what we saw last summer. I think that they have the ability to do it. And call out wrongdoing and really reach out to have equality. And I do think equality is, it has to happen to keep the peace. Of course, we do need economics. We need people working and making money, but that we have to solve these equality and equity issues, because otherwise you're only going to have a small portion being rich with great jobs and people not having money to get educated and so forth. It's going to be cyclical as it is. So something has to change.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. And thank you to our panelists. I want to, before I bring the participants in for questioning, because I know that I'm sure there's plenty of questions. And I know we've gone a little over the 3 o'clock hour, but let's do another poll. So we got 2 questions coming up. And there it is. First one says, do you believe the United States is politically heading in the right direction? Yes or no? And then the next one, what are the 3 biggest issues the US is facing today? Lack of bipartisanship, COVID-19, environment, climate change, foreign relations, national security, gun ownership, gun control, healthcare access, immigration, jobs, economy, taxes as one, safety and crime, social justice, which of course includes racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, and so on. So what are the top 3 issues that you believe the US is facing today? And the first one says, do you believe the US is heading politically in the right direction? And by the way, that is a monthly question that is asked in surveys. Are we heading in the right direction, or wrong direction? And it's been the wrong direction, slight majority, I think, for the last 2.5 years, but again, not by a lot. I know under COVID, it went up a little higher, but I'm curious to see the viewpoints of the audience here today. All right, and here are the results. All right, 57% believe we are heading in the right direction politically. That is comforting. And the top 3 issues, we got actually, okay. The number 1 issue is social justice. The number 2 issue is safety and crime. And then we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-way tie for pretty much most of the other issues: lack of bipartisanship, COVID-19, foreign relations, national security, gun ownership, immigration, jobs, and the economy. So within those, I guess you can have a separate argument, but we got 2 that stand out, and that is social justice and safety and crime. All right. Okay. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists?
No.
Anyone?
I have just one quick question.
Sure.
What could you likely see that could happen in the 2022 midterm elections?
Good question. What do you think would happen in the 2022 midterms? Just make sure we heard that correctly.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody want to answer that? What do you think the outcome of the 2022 midterm elections is? And I guess we can take that to mean, what impact that's going to have on the current political climate.
Well, traditionally, historically, the new incumbent always loses seats in the first midterm election. So I think given the very slim majority that the Democrats have in the House and the virtual tie in the Senate, I think you're going to see probably a Republican Congress, probably slim majorities, and more gridlock for 3 more years. But hopefully they will find a way to come together on some issues. Maybe infrastructure will bring them together. Maybe this new family act, parts of it will be acceptable to the Republicans. So perhaps they
I think we lost Dino.
may freeze.
Can you hear us, Dino?
Somebody froze. Damn it.
No. Anybody else? Well, we get Dino when we work to get him. Oh, there he is.
You can hear me now. I don't know how much of it you heard. I froze up. I'll step up and let my other colleagues jump in. I gave a good answer though. You couldn't hear it.
I agree with it.
There you go.
I think it's too early to tell, to be honest. That's going with too early to tell.
George?
I will say it all depends on the impact and how economy will stand at that point when the election comes around. If people are back to jobs and working, and that really will determine it. I know historically, indeed, many, in Cavan, they lose in the midterm election seats, but this could be something different if they can pass some of the programs that they are proposing that has a wide approval across the country, and if the economy improves and people are having jobs, I think it might be just the opposite. They might gain the seats, the Democratic Party, but it will depend on that economy, how economy does. I just want to point to one of the things on the interesting poll when we had it there, that healthcare access was very low, 7%. That's probably because in this school are people that all have a healthcare. And so 7%, I think, healthcare, it's one of the, I will call that on a human rights issue that, I have worked in the poor communities and I have seen not having access to healthcare, what it does to families. And, I think healthcare access is really, really important. And I always say that I tell my students, I have a proposal, but no one will ever listen. Let's have 100,000 or whatever the number, 150,000, a basic care that the government will provide to support every citizen of their country. And then above that amount, let the insurance companies have a great competition. We will have a great competition and lower prices because they'll pretty much have 100,000, 150,000 deductible. But this way, at least we will allow every citizen in our country to have that primary care and access to primary care doctor and go and see it when they are sick. It is a heartbreaking to see families not having a health insurance and impacts poor communities tremendously.
I just want to add, George, no family should have to think twice about whether or not to go to the hospital because of a medical bill. And just to add to that, that the number one cause of bankruptcy in America is medical related.
Absolutely. Yes.
Does anybody else in the audience have any other questions? Anyone?
I do.
All right.
Hi. What do you all think about the crisis at the border and our immigration policy currently in light of Trump being diametrically opposed to what Biden seemingly wants to do? And immigration to me is a social justice issue as well, being a teacher of immigrants for so long.
All right. Anybody want to?
I'll take a risk and I'll talk about, I am an immigrant myself. I am an
Okay.
immigrant. I was 19 years old. I didn't speak word of English when I came here. And so I had to learn my ABCs, and I worked in a meat factory, meat processing plant, and tried to work there and pay my way through college and learn the language. I do think, I do believe that we should have a border, that we should have a fence and limit the amount of illegal immigrants. However, I do believe we should have a policy to allow those immigrants coming in legally as human beings, not being trafficked by the criminal networks, and allowing people, and at the same time, people that are here and they are working and paying taxes, we have to provide a path to citizenship. That's just the right thing to do. They are here, people are working, paying taxes. We have to provide a way for them to get a citizenship. And I believe that's a common sense policy. I mean, if we have a need for employees, I don't believe overall illegal immigrations, people pouring across the borders, we don't know who they are and anything else. We have a security threats, terrorists, we can infiltrate, and they can be for years here and then plan attacks later. I really do think we need to know who comes to our country, but we should have a policy to allow people from these poor countries that want to come in. We should have a policy to allow them.
Thank you.
I do agree with that. I'm not necessarily in agreement with the separation at the border. And I agree it's a social issue, and that goes to it, that speaks to it. But I do agree that people have to be vetted. We do have a security threat. It's not the only threat that we have, though, because we have domestic terrorism also here. So people that were born here, we know that there's quite a few that are unhappy. But it's really a hard task because so many people want to come here, but we do have people who do it properly. And so what does that say for the people that just come in here illegally? So there just really that has to be reformed also, where we're considering that it is a social issue.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. So, thank you to the audience. And thank you to the panelists. I'm going to pass it over to Melissa, and she will provide the closing for today's event.
Thank you. So we may not all agree on the issues covered today, and that's okay. We're entitled to our diversity of thought. Our current political climate continues to have an impact on our everyday lives. You can be a passive bystander or you can get involved. Whether you agree or disagree with how our government works, you can take a variety of actions, such as supporting organizations that advance certain cause, building community awareness about those causes, joining peaceful protests, contacting our elected officials to ask them to vote in support of particular positions that you favor. It will be interesting to see what happens next. And the information shared by our panelists has been thought-provoking. So I want to thank as well the audience for joining us today, the panelists for sharing their thoughts with us, Professor Ritsatos for moderating the panel, of course, Unity and Community for including this event among the activities this week, and as always, Strategic Marketing for facilitating the Zoom experience. I hope you will join us for the remaining Unity and Community events. There are several more planned, and they all promise to be truly engaging and entertaining. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.